Good evening. My name is Father Richard Wahl.
You're watching Father Richard Wahl of the Congregation of St. Basil at the University of St. Thomas introduce Edward T. O'Rourke. Edward O'Rourke graduated from St. Thomas High School. He holds a master's degree in Latin American Studies from the University of Texas and is certified as a public accountant. Through Pax Christi, Mr. O'Rourke has been an active member of the peace movement. Most recently, he lived in Colombia, where he had the opportunity to observe the peace negotiations between the government and the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, People's Army. His talk, Abolish War, distills the lessons he has learned throughout his life as a peace activist.
Thank you, Father Wahl. I'm grateful to the Basilian Fathers for their hospitality, to the people who are here, to my brother Terry and Nivien Saleh, who set up the camera crew to record this event. I asked the people in the peace movement to stop talking about peace and conflict resolution and talk about war abolition. Be specific in your demands. Cut the U.S. military budget by 50%. Eliminate all nuclear weapons, abolish poverty, take all the nuclear weapons off of hair trigger alert. This seems like a big task, but we have to ask for it. And every idea starts off as quixotic, but people have to ask for changes. Think of the slavery abolition, labor unions, women's liberation, women's suffrage, the civil rights movement, the gays, and everybody else. At one time, slavery, gladiator sports, child abuse, wife beating, dueling were all perfectly normal. And at one time, of course, they became uncouth and then they became barbaric. But things were perfectly normal, and that's the way war seems now. What I will ask you to do is to learn from our white right-wing friends and do the things like reduce the military budget by 50% and the things that I had mentioned. There's a feeling that war is inevitable. It belongs to the human condition, but the wars are planned. The military officers and military contractors are highly paid people. They're not rageaholics. And people in the Whitehall, the Pentagon, Kremlin, all the military institutions, they're not looking for revenge. They're planning weapons and tactics continually. In the past, conservatives have asked for war abolition. Calvin Coolidge, Harry Stimson, General Douglas MacArthur, Pope Paul VI. What I want to do is ask Terry to read from Harry Stimson. He was the Secretary of War for the United States from 1940 to 1945.
We must never forget that under modern conditions of life, science, and technology, all war has been greatly brutalized, and no one who joins in it, even in self-defense, can escape becoming also in a measure brutalized. Modern war cannot be limited in its destructive method and inevitable debasement of all participants. A fair scrutiny of the last two world wars makes clear the steady intensification of the weapons and methods employed by both the aggressors and the victors. In order to defeat the Japanese aggression, we were forced, as Admiral Nimitz has stated, to employ a technique of unrestricted warfare, not unlike that which 25 years ago was the proximate cause of our entry into World War I. In the use of strategic air power, the Allies took the lives of hundreds of thousands of civilians in Germany and Japan. We, as well as our enemies, have contributed to the proof that the central moral problem is war, and not its methods. and that a continuation of war will in all probability end in the destruction of our civilization. Harry L. Stimson, 1947. The Nuremberg Trial, Landmark in Law. Foreign Affairs.
Thank you. How do you eliminate war? One good way is to eliminate poverty. A second Marshall Plan that would bring clean drinking water, sanitary facilities, basic education, health care to everyone in the world. When you have that, what will happen to the terrorists? They'll virtually disappear. There's a book, Why Nations Fail. The authors start off by comparing Nogales, Arizona, Nogales, Sonora, East Germany, West Germany, North Korea, and South Korea. And the geographical and the cultural circumstances were approximately the same, but the difference is having good governance. And when you have good governance, basically strong, non-corrupt government, you have some chance to eliminate poverty and do the things that you want in a society. Our contributions from the rich countries to the poor countries will help accomplish that. Train the world's armed forces for disaster relief, for the tsunamis, for droughts, for famines and landslides and everything else, the California wildfires. You get the experience from the logistics of bringing the water, the electricity, the medical supplies and such things as if it's the real thing, except people aren't firing pistols at you. The best thing to do would be to train the armed forces to speak the foreign languages and to learn the culture so they'll be ready when they go to these places. And you're going to have to pay some money for this because everybody wants to learn Spanish and stay at the Paseo de la Reforma in Mexico City, the Kurfürstendamm in Berlin, or the Left Bank in Paris. That's easy. But learning Arabic or Urdu or Hindi or Mandarin Chinese, not so easy. Have to pay for it. Eliminate all nuclear weapons. And Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, William Perry, and Sam Nunn had written in the Wall Street Journal advocating just the same thing. What happens, it doesn't take a nuclear confrontation between the United States and Russia. A nuclear confrontation between India and Pakistan will bring about nuclear winter, and would bring the end of all life on Earth. Something that happened, or almost didn't happen on September 26, 1983, the world nearly ended. I doubt one American adult in 100 knows about the story, but on that day, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov was the watch commander for the Soviet air defense. And on the radar screens, they saw a missile coming in from the United States. A few minutes later, there were 4 more. He made the decision not to inform his authorities, his people in command, because he decided if the United States were going to attack, it would not be with 5 missiles. And he knew that if he were to inform his superior officers, they would start shooting missiles and ask questions later. The Soviets were in a bind about this because, oh, thank you for saving the world, and by the way, you're insubordinate. So what was the solution? Early retirement. We spend about $30 billion a year on intelligence. How did the Western intelligence agencies find out about this? Some years later, his superior officer wrote his memoirs and told about the story. What I advocate is change the history courses as we know them. Virtually everybody teaches war uncritically. It goes like this, that fits in with the industrial complex. Number 1, war is necessary. Number 2, war is fought for the common good. 3, war is glorious. And 4, a more just world will emerge after this current current war. All this is false, but it's taught as routine reality in our history books. And what happens is that the history teachers think they're introducing intriguing thoughts to their students. In fact, their discussion range is extremely narrow. Alexander the Great, Urban II, Christopher Columbus, Bismarck, Julius Caesar, they were all war criminals. They should be treated as such. People who write the history books and the text would be condemned at a Nuremberg type of trial as accessories in the crime. A specific case is Samuel Eliot Morison, who wrote the story about Christopher Columbus. He left out the part where Christopher Columbus committed genocide with the Indians who welcomed him. There's emotions involved in war, we all know that. And when I grew up in Houston, there was the Victory at Sea, the 26 episodes put on by NBC they had reviewed 11,000 miles of film, put together excellent narrative, had the NBC Symphony Orchestra. Television reviewers asked out loud, who would want to watch war movies on Sunday afternoon? Within 2 weeks, they got their answer, just about everybody. And what happens is that World War II is so different than the rest. It's very seldom in life that you come face to face with absolute evil and overcome it. And that's what happened. Some of the Victory at Sea shows are far better than others. I especially like the one on Guadalcanal, D-Day, and Beneath the Southern Cross. There was Beneath the Southern Cross shows the story about the American and Brazilian navies doing patrol duty against the Nazi submarines in the South Atlantic. Refusing to pay, the story ends with showing the convoys and what they're protecting in that. And the musical score goes on, refusing to pay 1 cent in tribute and paying millions for defense. The two great navies have swept from the ocean highways their common foe. They fight side by side because they have learned to live side by side. The ships stream for their goal, Allied victory. And what happens is that emotions are important. During the Second World War, Frank Capra made a 7-part series on why we fight. General Marshall asked him to do it. He said, General, I've never made a documentary before. And General Marshall said, Mr. Capra, I've never led an army with 5 million men before. I'll take the job. He quickly saw that the Nazis had far better propaganda than they did, than he did in the United States, Great Britain, anybody. Lenny Reichenstall's famous documentaries or propaganda and such things. And so he decided, we're going to use Nazi propaganda as part of our propaganda. And it worked. And what I advocate is for the peace movements to offer prizes. We don't have much money, but people who write good poetry, songs, movies and such things, let them know, and use the Victory at Sea show as a model. When in 1969, there was a very fine song by Tommy James and the Shondells, Crystal Blue Persuasion. For those of us who are old enough to remember when that song came out, I invite you to hear it again for the first time. And for those who haven't, go to YouTube and hear the song. Look over yonder, what do you see? The sun is arising, most definitely. There be peace and good, brotherhood, crystal blue persuasion. Elvis Presley did something similar, If I Can Dream. Excellent song. So appeal to the emotions, and what we do nowadays is tax all income over $10 million. And there are 6 individuals in the world who have as much wealth as 3.5 billion. That's billion with a B. That's wrong. I would tax all income over $10 million. Abolish all tax havens and loans to dictators. If the human rights groups say this is an oppressive dictatorship, when somebody overthrows their government, they don't ask the governments to come and help them. The dictators are on the hook. And what they do is ignore the dictators, the banks ignore the dictators, and ask the surviving country to pay up the debts. No, that's wrong. That's terrible. Prisons everywhere should treat their prisoners as by the Geneva Conventions. Decent food, decent shelter, decent medical care, visiting. Pay the poor kids to stay in school. Some countries do this, and we should do this in our country. Number one reason people drop out is because they've got to work to support their family, and they have to. Make sure that every child in the world has a happy childhood. Happy childhood. And producing goods and services, of course, is important, but the primary requirement is that the benefits and the pain are evenly distributed, that the 1% shouldn't live at everybody else's expense. I propose a caring society that you see in the old song, I'll Be Home for Christmas, and in Robert Frost's famous poem, Death of a Hired Man. Home is the place where you go when they have to take you in. Abraham Maslow's needs hierarchy is simple and elegant. I'm surprised that a Jewish prophet, Confucius, Buddha, Mohammed, or Sigmund Freud or somebody did not come along with the idea, but the number one reason that we should exist as a society to make sure that every human being can achieve self-actualization. So now we're all on the same planet. There are no safe havens. Nuclear war comes and we will all be victims. I remember in Reader's Digest in the 1950s, there were 2 short paragraphs as filler material about a British couple in the 1930s could see another war was going to be coming in Europe. They decided to leave Europe. The husband got a job on a plantation in the South Pacific. They'd never heard of this island before, and the name at first was hard to pronounce. It was Guadalcanal. So what I offer here comes from all faith and humanitarian traditions. May all the religious people, atheists, agnostic, and everybody else work for a common goal that Isaiah proposed in turning swords into plowshares. In a famous speech in the Second World War, Winston Churchill projected with an Allied victory, people would be able to walk in broad sunlit uplands. The Allies went on to win the war. What I propose here is we can achieve the peace. Working together, we can have the broad sunlit uplands. We can get to there from here. Thank you. All right. Thunderous applause. The Pax Christi has something like an international peace group, but on a day-to-day purpose, they're all fragmented. The people in Pax Christi do things, and there are other organizations, the Quakers, the Mennonites, and the rest, but there's not some universal message or like marching orders on January 1st, we're going to do this for the rest of the year. So there's no common cause, no common program that I've seen. Yes, yes. What happens, I go to Atchison, Kansas with some frequency. The Pax Christi director is an Episcopalian, and he's been teaching at Benedictine College in Atchison for 30 years. So no, it's, you don't have to be a church-going Catholic, and you don't even have to believe in God to come to Pax Christi movement, the meetings. The president had won the Nobel Peace Prize last year. It was a tough process because many people in the country wanted a military victory, and you just don't have that if you're going to end the war. You're going to have to give up something. They're going to have to give up something. What I did learn is that you have to really make this peace process work, you're going to have to start increasing taxes for the people who are the richest people in the country. There's a highly uneven income distribution. The arable property, the rich people own just about all. The social services for education, police and public works and such things are generally mediocre. What I have seen in low tax societies is a very mediocre income distribution and very meager hope. One example is before the Civil War in the United States, in all the states that joined the Confederacy, there was not a single public school. And what we need in both the United States and other places, strong enforcement for environmental laws, labor laws, protection again for children. And in Colombia, there is especially a weak state. Their paramilitary forces are strong even with FARC going out of business. So what every society needs is a strong government that can bring education, healthcare, and public services, which Colombia is still faulting on. The Scandinavian countries, in a place like Finland, I think people pay something like 40 to 50% of their income on taxes, which seems like it's a whole lot, but you start looking at what you pay to the insurance companies and other services you have in the society. Instead of making a check out to the insurance companies, you're making it through your taxation. What's good about Finland as a model, education is free from kindergarten to medical school. So I like that. Everybody has a chance to advance. Now, you take the developed countries, and the United States is last in social mobility. And one reason when you start cutting back on access to education, access to this, that, and the other thing, you shouldn't be surprised. The United States also has the highest per capita number of prisoners in absolute number. So what happens if you're poor? It's almost a crime to be poor. We shouldn't have that. Everybody should have a chance to go ahead. In Great Britain, there's a financial transaction tax, which we in the United States do not have, but that Bernie Sanders says would pay for the higher education for everybody who wants it. And of course, higher education also for computers, to be a master mechanic, that sort of thing. So anything beyond the high school level should be free or almost free. And what happens in the world financial markets and foreign exchange, every day there's a volume about $3 trillion. That's astonishing. Now, what happens, how much of the $3 trillion has anything to do with making goods and services? Only a tiny fraction. So there's much speculation that's involved, and a tiny transaction tax would be helpful to financial markets to reduce speculation. Now, as an economist, there's some speculation that's good to keep the market structure sound, coherent, and that sort of thing. A little bit, but $3 trillion per day is just too much. That's just just too much. Yes, sir.
Costa Rica. Costa Rica doesn't have an army, if you know. How did that come about, and has that been successful?
It's been successful. I think it was in 1948 that there was a President Arias who made this. I think he made the decision that they weren't going to be attacked by Mexico or anybody else. Spend your money on helping the citizens, and they haven't been invaded, so it is successful. There's about 9 countries in the world, maybe more, that do not have armed forces. Of course, these are tiny places: San Marino, Andorra, Liechtenstein, and some of the Pacific Island countries. There are some. Maybe there's more than 9, but what I advocate here is reducing, of course, the budget for military, and then the military that does exist is to help deal with global warming and landslides and tsunami and famines and California wildfires, that sort of thing. Yes, sir.
How does your idea of war abolition fit in with Gandhi's ideas of nonviolence, satyagraha?
I'm surprised that Gandhi and Martin Luther King did not go into violence between countries. What he had was largely in India, of course, and other places, the caste system and social discrimination and British imperialism and that sort of thing. I think that had Gandhi not been assassinated, had Martin Luther King not been assassinated in another 5 to 10 years that they existed, they would have actually called for things that I'm asking for right now.
It seems like when there are good ideas, they're being squelched pretty quickly. I understand that in Colombia right now there are efforts to have a tax on sugary drinks in order to protect the people from getting obese, getting diabetes, all these bad things. And the woman, I forgot her name, who pursued this, has been threatened by thugs of the industry, of the soda industry.
I'm not surprised. The lady who won the Nobel Peace Prize, Wangari Maathai, I believe in 2005, from Kenya, they didn't threaten, they came to beat her up. I don't know if it was the police or whoever it was. So there's no protection. You do some real simple thing and you're going to have problems with somebody. I think with us, it's different than the Pan-African movement or Solidarity or the American Civil Rights. I don't think people are going to be threatened by what Pax Christi says. And of course, I could be surprised. But it's such a, when your program seems hopeless and so dreamy, they're not worried. Now, we start getting a couple million people writing to their congressman, then things could happen. But in China, there's the Feng Qing movement or some doggone thing that's the most innocuous thing in the world, but the Chinese were going after these people. And again, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but doesn't stop them. And a little something that is so common that in 1965, what Ralph Nader was proposing, what became the Automobile Safety Act that year, that there would be side mirrors, there'd be mandatory seat belts and such things. And the Detroit manufacturers were saying this will be the end of the automobile industry in the United States. And the same thing today, that if we put scrubbers on the smokestacks, we do this and the other thing, we're going to be out of business. And war is good business. And there isn't anything that's more lucrative. And one thing that is maybe they're good businessmen. So if you get a contract to build planes, what do? You put your production in as many congressional districts as possible, because when they want to cut back or say we don't need the planes anymore, then what happens, there's 100 people in your district who say, hey, we need the plane to keep on going. Now, how am I going to pay for my groceries? And what is totally different about the military is that everybody has to ask for things. Everybody has to have a lobby where there's mental health, children defense fund, anything and everything. You don't get it unless you ask for it. Now, what's different about the military is that the Pentagon will sometimes turn down a weapons system. It's redundant, we've already got it. Or the aircraft or the tank is ineffective, it doesn't fire rounds as fast, it has frequent mechanical breakdowns, the plane crashes too often, whatever. And sometimes the military contractor has enough wherewithal where it's going to get approved anyway. Now, you don't have that with Child Defense Fund. You don't have that with mental health. Excuse me, and you don't have anything like that in other walks of life. It's only the military that gets the military contractors to get deals like that, and it's a revolving door. Once you're high up enough, guess what? You become a vice president and one of the military contractors. Okay. Got a few extras here. My pleasure. Thank you for your work.